Hi, welcome to my channel. My name is Secho and I am the tutor at Tony Fashion Skills Agency, on Instagram at Tony_sewing lessons. And on this channel, we discuss all things sewing, where I bring you behind the scenes of some of the things you might have watched, some of the things you already know, to bring you to new techniques and easier ways to get things done in all things sewing, essentially. In today's video, I'm going to talk about pattern drafting and nailing your pattern drafting system or technique, whatever you want to call it. So usually when we draft the pattern for different dress types or different clothes, we are essentially creating like a first preview or a first view of what the dress is going to look like at the end of the day. Mind you, we have not even tested that pattern by maybe sewing it in like some scrap fabric to see how it will look at the end of the day. But we are just bringing ourselves to put all the measurements that we have of the client or ourselves on paper so that we can have a sense of how it looks on paper. And that is the idea for pattern drafting. Usually when we are doing pattern drafting, we use the basic bodice block. And the basic bodice block for any beginner is one of the best skills you can ever learn, right? If you're able to learn how to draft your basic bodice block, and you're able to do it so well, so much that you can use that same basic bodice block to draft different clothes or draft different patterns, you are well on your way to doing so many things that other beginners at the same level as you might not be able to do. And that is the beauty of the basic bodice block. And that is why in today's video I'm going to touch on some of the tips, some of the tricks, some of the hacks you can use to perfect your pattern drafting skills. If you're interested in this video, keep watching. So I was talking about pattern drafting and the basic bodice block, and what I wanted to share as a first point to note when you are drafting your basic bodice block, in this case as something you are going to use to draw a pattern or draft a pattern for a dress, you need to think of it like a map, right? Think of it like a map. And literally when I ran my various sewing classes, what I tell my students is look at it as a map that is showing you the direction of different parts of the body. So usually for the vertical measurements or the measurements that show that the dress is upright, what you are trying to tell the fabric is that, oh, when you're moving towards the bust line, move from the shoulder, and this is where the shoulder begins. You have to tell the fabric where shoulder begins, and from the shoulder move downwards for 8 inches or 10 inches, whatever the shoulder to apex measurement is. You tell the fabric move 10 inches down, you're going to see the bust. Now when you get to the bust, to even make it more graphic, you are telling the fabric that when you get to the bust point, this is how big the house is, or this is how big the auditorium you are looking for is. And that is one way that you are able to understand what the basic bodice block looks like when you're using it to draft a dress, or when you're using it to draft any clothes or something like that for any pattern in that idea. So think of it like a map. And as much as possible, the second tip that you want to do with your basic bodice block is try to put every single thing you want to put on the dress finally on the basic bodice block. And that goes to also mean like a sub tip of this tip is that you might want to have 2 or 3 different versions of your basic bodice block. You might want to do one that doesn't have your darts identified in it or things like that. They might want to do one that has your darts identified in it. They might want to do another one that you can use for different styles as much as possible. You can just use a pencil to draw out different darts you want to include in that dress. But at the end of the day, what you want to do with the basic bodice block after you have drafted it is to make sure that it is reflecting on what you want to see at the end of the day. You want your basic bodice block or your pattern for a particular dress to reflect almost accurately how the dress is going to look like. And so you do not want to take a lot of things for granted, especially those little measurements. So if you have measurements like 3.25 or in sewing or in measuring with your tape measure, it's 3/4, right? Or 3 1/4 of a measurement. If you have 3 inches 1/4 of a measurement, you do not want to give yourself a very little room to move in that measurement. It's ideal to round it up a bit so that you have a lot more room to get the accurate design you want. So that at the end of the day, you are getting closer and closer to making the dress look how you want it to look at the end of the day. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. The third tip I want to share is about measurements. It's about transferring measurements to your basic bodice block, or transferring measurements into any pattern you are drafting for any dress, right? So usually when you're drafting the bust line, or you are drafting the shoulder to the bust line or shoulder to the apex, there are some standard measurements that you definitely need. And those standard measurements, like when I was learning how to sew, they were 8 inches. That from the shoulder to the bust line is usually 8 inches. From the bust line to the waist is usually 8 inches, and same for the waist to the hip. Now, those standard measurements are not supposed to be your go-to measurements. They are supposed to be your buffer measurements, or they're supposed to be your plan B measurements. What your plan A measurements are supposed to be are the actual measurements of the person for whom you are sewing. And what that means is that taking the person's from shoulder to apex is very important to give it the most accurate finish of the dress. If you use standard measurements for a lot of time, chances are one day it's going to tell on you. One day you're going to use it on somebody whose measurement does not fit the standard, and you would be in a lot of trouble. So when transferring measurements from a person to the basic bodice block, or using it to draft any pattern, I would advise that you use the measurements of the person as much as possible, and not use the standard measurements as your main source of accuracy. I do admit that most fast fashion brands, or most fashion brands that make clothes in thousands of quantity, use these standard measurements because it's quick and easy, and then a large percentage of the population have these measurements as their shoulder to bust to waist and all that, and so it makes life just so easy. But I would not advise you to do the same. Now, the fourth tip that I want to share when you're drafting your pattern is to always look for other alternatives. Okay, like I tell in my sewing class, there's the easy way, and then there's the easier way. So the easier way to do something is definitely better than an easy way to do it. And what I have realized is that particularly on the arm side, when you're creating the arm side, usually when you're creating the arm side, well, what I usually teach my students is they can literally use the same arm side you're using for the front, for the back. I mean, especially if you are beginners, right? Because it makes life easier. But as time goes on, you learn more and more about how you can perfect that arm side. You can decide to use other techniques, or you can decide to find a different way of measuring it. Now, there are techniques where you can actually measure the bust and divide it by 6 and add 1 inch to determine how the arm side is going to look at the end of the day. I'm going to do a short video to demonstrate that. But at the end of the day, you want to find techniques that can give you the best of both worlds. So as you are learning different techniques in pattern drafting, you're seeing all these techniques, see them as options, and then use those options to find your own. Okay, use them as options to find your own. I have had some of my students come to me and tell me, oh, you taught us this thing, but I found my own way and it worked. And I am always happy with it, because at the end of the day, we want to explore our creativity, and then we also want to enjoy sewing. And if we end up giving you straight jacket rules that do not make it so fun for you to sew, then I think we are missing the point for this entire exercise. So use your the different techniques you have when you're pattern drafting or even cutting fabric, to bring you into awareness that, oh, these are our options I can explore. How do I get the best of both worlds? Can I decide to do this technique in order to get this effect, or vice versa? All depends on you. So that's the fourth tip I want to give you. All the techniques you see in drafting your pattern, consider them as options and try to test them out. But of course, ultimately, try to find the one that is most comfortable for you. Now, the fifth tip that I want to give you in this video is, I think it's going to be a very dicey one, but I'm sure you're going to really Actually, I'm really going to give it a second thought and come share in the comment section what you think about this. The last tip I want to share when you're pattern drafting is to always draft on paper. Always draft on paper. Always draft on paper. Always draft on paper, especially if you're a beginner. And by extension, play around with drafting styles for some time. Especially if, let's say, you're learning how to sew but you don't have a sewing machine yet. It would be a very beautiful skill to have if you perfect your pattern drafting now. And when I say draft on paper, I'm not only saying that draft the same thing on paper every time. I'm saying that, well, when you're drafting on paper, it saves you the time and the stress and all that it would have taken you if you're drafting on fabric. But essentially, it is also saying that you can actually get like a book that you can use to test out drafting. You can test the drafting out. So when you see like a photo on, let's say, on Instagram, and you're like, oh, I like this dress, I wonder how it looks, I'm wondering how it looks online. You just, take a screenshot of that picture and they're like, how would this look when, drafted out, when I want to sew? So you can use your own measurements to say, oh, okay, this is how it will look when you're drafting. And what that will eventually do for you is teach you one of the best skills I like to share in my class, which is reverse engineering styles or reverse engineering clothes, where you're able to see, the beginning from the end, where the dress you are seeing on Instagram is the end, but then you're able to see the beginning, where the beginning was, oh, you see that because of how this neckline is cut, or how the neckline is looking to you, this is most definitely how it was cut in the beginning. Does it make sense? Yes. So you're able to see the beginning from the end, and that is such an important skill to have, especially if you're learning how to sew. Being able to take a dress and try to calculate or analyze or assess how it's supposed to be cut will save you a lot of money and will also make you a lot of money, especially if you're able to replicate those styles. So imagine if you start your own fashion business where you make custom clothes for people and they bring you like styles they want you to, steal some different details and put together in a different, dress. It's easier for you because it's something you have tried more and more and more during the time you're learning how to sew by pattern drafting. So yes, always pattern draft on paper. Make pattern drafting one of the things you like to play around with. I like to draw, I like to just doodle things around, and pattern drafting is one of the ways that you can also use to enjoy your pastime. So yeah, you should make pattern drafting, or you should make at least those sketches fun. And that is also going to be my 6th bonus tip for today's video. Do not take everything so serious. Don't do that to yourself. Do not take everything so serious. See everything as fun, as options, as alternatives, as things you're playing around with. Why do I keep saying play along? As things you're playing around with, so that you're discovering more and more techniques, especially if you're in beginner stage. If you're in beginner stage, please do not put a lot of pressure on yourself to do something or to sew something or to do something that somebody else might not be doing. Move in your own progress and add on as you go along, especially as you're making your first dress. Thank you so much for joining today's video. I'm going to share another video as well. Always share in the comment section how you have perfected your pattern drafting, or how you have used your basic bodice blog to pattern draft very beautiful clothes. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.